All right, lords and lovelies, welcome back at last to the Knights of the Round podcast. I am your wonderful hostess, the Lady Ravah.
And I am Lord Arthur, and welcome back, I think is the correct way to say it. So sorry that we have been gone for so long. We've had a little bit of a up change in our life here, or upending of our life almost. Been digging a lot of hours at work. However, I think we've finally gotten it to the point where we can get a pretty consistent schedule. We're going to be recording a bit more often, getting some more guests on, and bringing you some more of our content, whatever it amounts to.
Yeah, especially now that, we're not standardized testing and we're not getting, started at a brand new job, we can kind of do some more stuff with our hobbies. So if you're listening today, this is part one of a two-part series. When we started putting this specific topic together, we decided that what we have on our lists, it's a lot to talk about in 45 minutes. We would be here for 3 hours. And a lot of people, unless you're putting on something to go to sleep, you usually don't listen to 3-hour podcasts. So this is part one. Be sure to check out part two in the next coming weeks. You don't have to listen to both to get everything, but it would be nice if you did. I'm just saying.
And this episode is really going to be our establishing point where we talk about, adaptations is the subject. What is an adaptation? What makes a good one? What makes a bad one? What are some of our favorites? What are some of our least favorites? And I think that a best way to kind of talk about this is to define what is an adaptation.
Well, specifically for this one, for those of you, of course, people know what adaptation, what that word means. We're going to be focusing on adaptations from book to film, maybe talk about a little bit of remakes, video game adaptations. We do plan to talk about anime and cartoon live action adaptations, but that is a whole nother episode and we could talk endlessly about that. But when we think about a good adaptation, I have 3 criteria that I think everything needs to meet to be a good adaptation. Being a good film and being a good adaptation are two different things, and we'll kind of get to that. But
I agree.
I think if you are going to adapt something, you need to understand the story that you are trying to tell in whatever way, shape, or form you're trying to tell it. You need to know at least the world, the message, the themes. If you are going to keep the characters, you need to know who the characters are. If you're going to create new characters in that world, that's entirely different. But if you are going to take the characters from the original source and retell them in your movie, then you need to understand who those characters are. And if you are doing an adaptation, you feel free to take some liberties, but still respect the source material, because there are things that are going to be different from reading a book or playing a video game versus watching a 2-hour movie.
To put it simply, a good adaptation is a faithful recreation of the themes and messages of the original work, but in a new form.
Ooh, that was good. Did you like Merriam-Webster that, or did you come up with
that's just me.
That was good. I like that.
Likewise, what makes a bad adaptation in my book, it's simply a surface level recreation of the plot of the original, where you don't actually understand why the original was so good and why the original was so enjoyed and beloved and relatable. You just go, well, that story seemed to work, so let's just tell it again, but different.
They picked up the book in Barnes & Noble and they read the back and they go,
I can do that.
I can tell that into a story. So do you have anything that specifically you wanted to mention first to kind of like to talk about our, having our criteria to kind of get our conversation started?
Well, I think one that I think most people would be very familiar with, at least most people in our circles would be very familiar with, and that kind of allows us to juxtapose, I think very well, would be the Lord of the Rings live action movies and the Hobbit live action movies.
Okay.
Because again, they were both works written by the same author. They were both movies directed by the same director, but the two of them had massively different receptions from fans.
Well, I don't think it's just that they had massively different receptions from the fans. They were two completely different movies, and they told two very different stories.
Well, of course,
one told 3 succinct stories. One told one story, but they stretched it out over 9 hours from a children's book.
And to be fully honest, missed all of the points of the original. So let's talk about the good one first. Let's talk about Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. Fantastic trilogy. We own the extended edition. One of these days, we're just going to have a movie date and just spend like 18 hours.
Don't tell our fans we haven't done that already. They're going to judge us.
Well, we've both watched it separately, but we can watch it together at some point. But point is, the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson was a masterwork in cinema. The cinematography ahead of its time, the acting absolutely a stellar. Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn just could not have gotten a better actor to play that role.
So what do you think then made that a good adaptation?
It goes back to what I said. They understood what the themes and the messages were of the original Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, and they told that story.
So what do you think those, like, what themes translated from the films to, or from the book to the film? Because I'm going to be honest, I'm going to out myself here. I've read The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. I've never read the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
I've read the the Fellowship of the Ring. I have not read the Two Towers and the Return of the King.
I would read the Fellowship of the Ring if I hadn't given it to someone for safekeeping that I am related to.
The 75th year anniversary of all three books wrapped in gold leaf in the other room.
Okay.
So yeah, we can get you started on that one.
Okay. So themes and messages.
The themes and messages. And I've done I've read a lot of literary analysis on the subject. The themes and messages came from Tolkien, who just saw the world come out of World War I, come out of World War II, who was a special forces in World War II. He saw the rise of fascism. He saw this terrifying, bloody conflict, and he wrote a story that basically was anti-fascist and anti-war. Very much, it was a political piece. He wrote Lord of the Rings specifically to show that good, honest, little innocent people can affect the world in massive ways by standing up against what they know is evil. That literally the small folk, Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin, make the biggest changes across the world. And if it wasn't for these little people standing up and going, hey, I want to protect my peaceful life, then Sauron would have won. Fascism would have won. And it is very evident in Peter Jackson's retelling of it. Gandalf plays very heavily in the emphasis of, Frodo, you are why we are doing this. Like, we cannot do this without you. Do not give the ring to me. I will go mad with its power. Do not give the ring to Galadriel or all these other strong people, because they will go mad for its strength. You care not for strength. You only care for your peace. I wish we had never seen these times. So too do everyone who sees them, but it's not for them to decide. It's merely them to decide what to do with the time we are given. My favorite quote from any book ever.
So do you think it was because one thing that people always bring up when they talk about book to movie adaptations is, they left out this part, and they left out this part, and they left out this part, and they left out this part. And realistically, if you've got a book as long as The Fellowship of the Ring, as long as, let's say Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, anything like that, you can't adapt every single detail into a movie. So how do you cross the line then? And sticking with Lord of the Rings, from adapting, picking and choosing what to adapt, and then the final product having adapted enough to be a good movie and a good adaptation.
You keep it on the themes. You keep it on the message. Why are we telling this story? Are we telling a fantasy story where a bunch of cool fights happen and they defeat the big bad evil guy? No, again, they keep it centered on what is the story about. And the story is about small people doing good things to fight against a growing evil.
Or I would maybe say that one person's actions often can't affect the world or have a bigger impact. I would say that, that would be closer to like a literary analysis of that theme.
Yeah.
And I would agree.
Tolkien's work is, again, so filled with hope and this underlying message of, like, do not give up. There will always be hope. A classic example, the Battle of Helm's Deep, one of the greatest moments in all of cinematic history, the Battle of Helm's Deep. look to me at the dawning of the fifth day. To the east, my coming will be heralded by the rising of the sun. And again, they are trapped in that last room. The orcs and the Uruk-hai have almost broken through the barricades. There's like a half dozen men of Rohan left. Almost all the elves are dead. There's just Gandalf and Aragorn and Gimli and like a half dozen men from Rohan standing between the Uruk-hai hordes and the innocent civilians below. And they're like, well, Gandalf's going to show up. It's got to be today because we've got about 30 minutes before we're all dead. And sure enough, the moment that the sun rose on the dawning of the fifth day, there he was with an army at his back, and they were able to win the day. And if they had given up that hope, if they had just surrendered 30 minutes earlier, that would have been it. But because they held on to that hope, literally fighting for that hope to the last man, they were able to do what they knew they had to do, protect the innocent people.
So then why? Well, so going on that and piggyback on that, I think I can add more into a discussion about The Hobbit as an adaptation, because I could talk about all day about how The Lord of the Rings was a good movie, but I don't think I can talk about how good it is as an adaptation because I've never read the book. I've read The Hobbit a couple of times because I had to. I picked it up and put it down a couple of times before I finally finished it. So of course, we know why they stretched it into 3 movies. They stretched it into 3 movies because that's how you make more money. But then what happens when you do that? The Hobbit was a book written for children.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to stretch a book for children into 3 movies, you've got to add a bunch of stuff to that. But none of that adds anything to the overall story.
Right.
They hit all the story beats. They actually didn't really leave that much out. They hit most of the stuff from the story.
And they added extra content as well.
And they were able to add extra content, some Silmarillion stuff. But what I think Peter Jackson was doing at that point, that he said, "Ooh, Legolas was a really popular character. I'm gonna bring him back in this. This is gonna be great. And I loved Legolas. I had a crush on him when I was a little girl.
You still do.
He was
don't
cute.
lie. Don't lie. You still do.
So do you. So let's not talk about this. But, and he's like, that's going to bring the eye candy's going to bring the women back in. So let's bring that in. But The Hobbit is Bilbo's story of triumph and still follows those same themes of, one small person and what they can do and the impact that they can have, or I don't want to say small, but like one person and the impact they can have. But when you add in stuff like that, you lose the message of the original story. Mm-hmm. The original book was a fine story without that. And it's not to say I don't want to spend the whole podcast shitting on, they left out and they added all this extra stuff, so it's not good. Because I'm actually going to talk about, there's a particular movie I want to talk about later that has everything. It is a good adaptation, but it is still a crappy movie.
And I have a movie I want to talk about later that's a great movie, but a bad adaptation.
But anyway, so back to around to my point is the message, the theme, the characters got misunderstood. I think Bilbo was fine. They understood
Bilbo for the most part,
they understood his character, but it almost seems like Peter Jackson lost his understanding of what the message of the original series was in an effort to stretch this one book. And The Hobbit's actually, it's
a short book. It's not that long. No, like there are several.
My kids
most
would say
of the
it's
Harry
long,
Potter books are longer than The Hobbit.
Right.
I would like maybe it's about the size of like the Chamber of Secrets or the Prisoner of Azkaban. It's not a big book. So you're talking about the message. What to you is the message of The Hobbit, the book?
Well, that's what I said. It's the message. It's over the whole series. Is how So in a literary sense, books, movies, any good book or movie has more than one theme. But the theme that sticks out the most to me that I took away from the book is that one, well, that's not really a theme, but that it shows how one person, even a person with no skills, no underlying abilities, no magic, no superpowers, how that person can impact and change the course of events and the huge course of events.
Mm-hmm.
and how he was able to do things that this band of dwarves, with all of their strength and all of their stubbornness, and he was able to do things that this wizard, with all of his infinite wisdom and his years and his magic, was unable to do. And one person could do that. And I think that's the theme, one of the themes of the story that you don't get in the movie, because the movies are so bloated and they add in so much extra stuff. They lose that part that makes it a good adaptation. They lose the focus that makes it a good adaptation.
And I would also add in that one of the biggest themes of The Hobbit, it's anti-greed. Literally, Smaug is a reference to the dragon
to Jeff Bezos?
No, well, sort of. To the dragon from Beowulf. And Beowulf's the dragon sickness, the immense greed that causes people to go mad for gold. That was what he was talking about, and that Smaug is this literal epitome of violent greed. You have the character of Gollum, who literally has his one tiny little precious shiny ring that he is just absolutely obsessed over, and obviously we know, having read and watched The Lord of the Rings, what that one ring actually was. But when The Hobbit as a book came out, The Lord of the Rings did not yet exist to the public. And so that was an allegory for, you don't have to have, mountains and mountains of gold to be a greedy creature. You could be this shriveled, terrifying little goblin in the middle of the worst place ever, but you have one tiny valuable thing, and that one tiny valuable thing can make you go insane with greed. Mm-hmm. And because, again, like you said, they bloated it out. They focused on try to focus on every single character and give them all character arcs and add characters that weren't there and focus on things that really didn't play into these central messages of one small person can make a big difference, and greed can corrupt and will corrupt, from small greed to big greed.
So one of the things that I think an adaptation should do that this one missed, the parts of The Hobbit that were really good, Bilbo and Gollum's meeting when they have their battle of riddles, that was a good part of the film. Bilbo outsmarting Smaug, that was a good part, because those all came from the source. Mm-hmm. What you should do with your adaptation is you should take what already exists and make it, change it into a different medium. It's hard to imagine from a book how big Smaug is. Mm-hmm. But when you look at him on the TV, it's like, whoa. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And I compare him to Bilbo. I can compare him to things that already exist. So I can understand his size and why he is so fearsome. That's when it becomes a good adaptation. It adds those things that you don't get in the book, whereas they just describe things in the book, and then you can see them on the screen, and that's where the good parts of the adaptation come in.
So, talking about The Hobbit, switching gears a little bit, you want to talk about something that was maybe a good film, but a very bad adaptation.
I couldn't really think of, when we were doing our notes. Why do we have cats? I couldn't think of when I was, planning for this, a good, like a movie that wasn't a good adaptation. I couldn't think of any that were reverse. I guess I should say. Yuffie did not
like that comment.
Yes, one of our cats is up here harassing us at the moment.
And sorry, we love her.
She's very upset that she's not getting any attention.
Yes.
But what was the movie you were going to talk about?
So I was going to talk about The Shining.
So that's because I've never read or seen The Shining.
So it's funny. So everybody knows about Jack Nicholson's role as Jack Torrance in The Shining. You haven't watched it, but we're gonna do that sooner or later. It is a horror classic.
I'll watch it eventually, I promise.
It is a horror classic. Anybody who is a fan of horror will tell you that it is a absolute masterwork in psychological horror. And Stephen King, who wrote The Shining, hates Jack Nicholson's or I forget who exactly was the director of it.
It's keep talking, it'll come to me. Oh, Stanley Kubrick.
Stanley Kubrick?
Thank
you. So yeah, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Stephen King hates it because it is not faithful in any way to the book. In fact, he hated it so much, and in his opinion, it was so unfaithful to the book that he created his own live TV short, and it was universally panned by fans, by critics. It was bad acting, bad writing.
It's not a good adaptation.
It's not a good adaptation of Stephen King's work. But if you look at it as just a movie, it's a fantastic acted, fantastically shot. It's suspenseful. It's horrifying. It is deserving of its title as a landmark in the horror movie genre. So that asks a question, or at least to me, it answers one. Can a bad adaptation be a good movie?
Yeah, it can. But that's almost a different topic in itself. Because I kind of want to, we're focused on like what makes a good adaptation, because you can still have adaptations that are bad films. You can have adaptations that are bad and be good movies. But like, for example, I actually wrote on here, and I might get some flack for this. Twilight is a good adaptation. Twilight is a good adaptation of the books. I am not, and I want this on the record, it is in recording, it is not a good movie. But it is a good adaptations. It is a good adaptations. I will fully admit, when I was in high school, I have read all the Twilight books. I bought the first one when it came out. Everybody was talking about it. So I was like, all right, I'm going to see what this thing is up with. I liked the first 3 books. The 4th one was like hit or miss, but Twilight is a good adaptation. It understands the characters. It understands the world. It hits all the right beats from the plot and the story in the book. Yeah, of course, it's going to leave some stuff out. Twilight's a pretty long book. I will give that to Stephanie Meyer. It is a long book, but it's not a good movie. But in the case of, is it a good adaptation? That doesn't matter, because it adapts the story. It tells it to the audience. And the first Twilight, it is what it is. It's a harmless romance between,
it's like a dark romance.
Sort of, and it's a teen romance, it's whatever.
It's a dark
fine.
teen romance, and
it's fine.
It is what it is.
But, Bella and Edward, regardless of how people feel about who was picked to play them, they are played to the parts that they were written in the books.
Just because Stephanie Meyer wrote a piece of cardboard with a human name doesn't mean that it's a bad actor. It just means they had bad material to work with.
But it was still, again, it was still well adapted. Even some of the parts that I wouldn't have adapted from Breaking Dawn, they still put in the movie, and I was like, okay, it is what it is, but it is still a good adaptation, and that's why I always use Twilight actually as my go-to when I say that a movie can be just like the book and still be bad.
And I'll just use that as a perfect transition to say a movie can be just like the book and be absolutely fantastic.
Well, yeah, obviously.
If it's, just like a fantastic book, like Holes.
Love Holes.
Holes is...
I watched Holes the other day.
I will say this. Holes is probably the best adaptation of any media in any form ever. And I say that not because I think that it is the greatest movie ever, but because, literally 95% of the script in the movie were just lines taken directly from the book. If you read the book while watching the movie, the scenes lay out chapter by chapter to the book. The only thing, it literally, the director and the actors and the author of the book all together agree that the only thing that is not true one-to-one to the book was Stanley, the main character's weight. In the book, he was an overweight, chubby kid. In the movie, is played by Shia LaBeouf.
He's Shia LaBeouf, yeah.
Actual cannibal Shia LaBeouf. I mean,
no, that's before. That's before that.
That's before he became. But
that's before the mouse ruined him.
They ended up going with Shia LaBeouf because he knew the book front to back, and he had the lines memorized. He came in ready with entire scenes from the book memorized for his audition. And they're like, we will never find a actor who more perfectly understands Stanley than this kid right here. Let's just go ahead. If that's the only thing that we're off is that he's not chubby, oh well, we'll be okay.
And I think, again, it brings to life one of the themes from the books. And I think one of the themes from the book is kind of, it almost seems to be kind of you make your own destiny type thing. I think that's one of the
breaking
things that I get it.
generational curses.
I wouldn't say that that's a theme because that's kind of specific, and themes are not supposed to really be specific. They're supposed to be universal. But maybe the idea of you make your own luck.
Yeah.
Would be more of a theme, and it just took those things from the book and enhanced them. You know, it enhanced some of the things from the book. We're able to visualize the characters. We're able to see the different things. It is a little
see
bit
the desert and like the oppressive nature of the camp that they're in.
I will say one of the things that I think the book does a little bit better is the transitions back and forth from the timeline are a bit easier to understand because it does go from Stanley in the present to Kate and Sam meeting for the first time. Oh no,
Yeah.
it goes to kissing Kate because that's why they're digging the holes.
Yeah.
And her being the outlaw, but then it goes back and it keeps going back and forth between all three of those, and it kind of juxtaposes those and shifts through those a lot. And that's a little easier to understand in the book. It's a little harder to piece together the timeline in the film, but that's not something that couldn't be fixed by watching the movie a second time.
Right.
Or reading the book. It's not a long book, guys.
But again, the actors knew their roles. They played it well. And again, because they were adapting good source material and they adapted it very, very, very faithfully, it came out as a good movie. Like, it obviously, like, this came out almost like a piece of love. Like the director and the actors enjoyed this book so much. They're like, we just want this to get to as many people as possible. Talking about maybe some other things. And again,
let's keep from that last idea that you had. Is that so? I was going to ask you the question of feeding off what you said, does something have to have good source material to be a good adaptation? As Twilight proves, I would say no, but I want to see what you think about that.
You say that, but I don't think Twilight is good source material. I think Twilight is garbage.
That's my question was. My question was, does something have to have a good source material to be a good adaptation?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. My answer is no. Like, it can have great source material and be a horrible adaptation. Again, like The Shining book, fantastic. The adaptation, Stanley Kubrick, horrible adaptation, great movie.
But what I'm saying is, can something have bad source material but still be a good adaptation?
So let's define. Do you mean good adaptation or a good work of media unto itself?
A good adaptation.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You can very faithfully recreate bad media. Absolutely, you can very faithfully recreate bad media.
Okay,
it gives you a bad product.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to get at with, because you said Holes was good because it had good source material from it, but you can still have a good movie with bad source material, or a bad movie with good source material, or something like that. And that's kind of what I was trying to get you to.
And as The Hobbit proves, you can have a bad movie from good source material in doing an adaptation as well. So it all depends on how you handle it. So that's one of to me the coolest parts about adaptations, and why I don't think that they are necessarily instantaneously just write it off as a sellout or a cash cow or whatever, is that you can take something that maybe is kind of good, it has some great things in it, and then elevate what is already good in it when you adapt it to a different medium. Do
you have any examples of that you could talk about?
Where
they took something that was like okay and they made it even better? Because I have an example of that.
I've got one actually, and it kind of gives me some extra things to talk about. The animated Dark Knight Rises. It is an
animated version.
Oh yeah, no. Of Old Man Bruce fighting against the mutants in future Gotham. The Dark Knight Rises is one of my favorite all-time Batman comics. I'm a massive Batman nerd.
Okay, I thought you were gonna say movies, and I was gonna be like, we're gonna lose some subscribers if you say The Dark Knight Rises was your favorite Batman movie.
No. So the Dark Knight Rises, which takes place way into the future, Old Man Bruce. Think about like Old Man Logan.
Yeah.
Very similar kind of setup. He's at the very end of his streak. He's retired from being Batman for a long while, but eventually decides to get back into the game when these mutant, gangers start roaming the streets of Gotham. He's like, well, the police aren't doing this. I've got to step in to stop this. And this is set in a future in the DC universe where Superman, Big Boy Blue, has struck a deal with the U.S. government. He is of course, the symbol of America. And now he is under the thumb of Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan uses Superman basically as his WMD on call. And so whenever like, hey, the Russians over in Cuba are getting a little bit agitated, Superman, go blow up a couple of their buildings real quick, put them back in their place for America. And so Batman and Superman start having this, back and forth. To all this, to say, the Dark Knight Rises comic was a great comic. It is, I think it was a Stephen Miller, I think was the author of it. But
Sure.
but the point is that it is one of the most famous runs of Batman. And it gave us some of the most intense, scenes and iconic moments in Batman's run. Him versus the Joker, where the Joker ends up killing himself. Him versus Superman, where we finally get that good fight of Batman versus Superman, who would win, and it plays out exactly how the fans kind of wanted it to, and the animated version does it fantastically. It very accurately retells the story of The Dark Knight Rises. It gives you all those good big moments and high points, sells those really hard. It does it in a way as well that lets you enjoy the beautiful artwork from the comic, but now in motion. You get to see this excellent fight between the Batman and the mutant gang leader, Batman and the Joker, Batman and Superman. You get to see them animated in their full glory, and it absolutely adds to the experience.
So do you think then that adapting comics to the big screen and putting superheroes on the big screen, it enhances the comic book experience, and those adaptations end up making the media better?
It can, absolutely. But I would argue as well is that if you are adapting it and you don't understand what makes those comic book moments work, then you won't be able to catch that magic. You won't understand why the death of Gwen Stacy was such a massive, impactful moment, or how to best visualize it. I love the way that it's visualized. Say what you will about the movie, Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield handles the death of Gwen Stacy very well.
So when you say realizing its impact, what do you mean? Do I need to understand the impact of the death of Gwen Stacy on the comic book universe to? I'm confused what you mean by that.
But of course, it is a massive effect on Spider-Man as a character.
Oh, okay.
And so let's take an example of how it's done wrong. Let's talk about what you call it.
So are we sticking? Are you talking about like how comic books can be adapted
how
wrong, and it can take away from the experience?
To go back to what you had just asked me, does adapting a comic book to the big screen always improve the comic book experience? It can if you understand it, but an example of somebody not understanding what makes that comic moment work so well would be the death of Superman. Obviously, again, the death of Superman, one of the biggest,
are we talking about BVS now?
We're talking about BVS.
Okay,
now.
good. I can jump back in the conversation again.
The death of Superman was one of the biggest selling comics of all time. It shook the comic book industry. Superman die? No. And then when they adapt that to Batman v Superman, it's like third wheel to the actual story that's going on. Superman versus Batman, and then Superman versus Lex Luthor, and then they're introducing the start of the Justice League. And by the way, Superman dies.
Oh God, what's his name?
Doomsday.
Doomsday.
By the way, Doomsday shows up and Superman dies. It's like, whoa, no, literally, it is the title of the comic where this happens. The death of Superman. That should be like the star.
Part of it also in that movie, you're also introducing Batman to the DCEU. Superman's had his outing in the DCEU, but this version of Batman, you're also introducing him in this film.
Right.
And one of the things I do like is it does, BVS does assume that you know the basic story of Batman, which, to be fair, I'm kind of tired of hearing the same story about the origins of Batman over and over and over again. There's only so many ways you can tell me that
his mother got
his
shot.
Mother and his father got shot.
The pearls.
But you're also trying to do that in the same film, and it ends up, like you said, being a bad adaptation. And just like in the Lord of the Rings, they're trying to cram too much into it. And
You
that
mean The
alone, yeah, so sorry, The Hobbit. That alone doesn't make it a bad adaptation, but that is a huge point of why it was adapted badly.
Mm-hmm. Again, they didn't understand the source material, and they tried to adapt so many different kinds. Like, so they tried to fit the death of Superman, the Dark Knight Rises, and use that as the introduction of the Justice League,
the introduction of Batman and Wonder Woman
as all in the same movie. And it's like, absolutely not. No, like that. You're trying to cram 4 films that each should have their own specific film into one movie. Absolutely, you're going to lose a lot.
Because of that, you don't end up adapting any of those stories well, because the story ends up being so convoluted that you don't feel the death of Superman. You're not sad about it. You know, you had Man of Steel, sure, but I've never seen Man of Steel, and I didn't really think I needed to watch it to understand Superman. It was, Superman comes in, beats up bad guys, destroys lots of buildings. That's literally all I think Superman. I needed to know from that film. But
arguably, I would say that the DCEU absolutely misses the mark on who Superman is as a character. Like, they don't even get close to understanding the character of Superman until the movie Justice League, when he comes by and is like, I know a little something about hope. You've murdered hundreds of people. What do you understand about hope? What do you like? Yeah, I could totally understand if this was like the Justice League animated series Superman that shows up, or the comic book Superman that shows up, who like literally does every single conceivable thing in his power to make sure that, like, oh no, I'm fighting this intergalactic tyrant that has the ability to destroy suns. I'm going to beat him and also help this little old lady across the street while I'm doing it.
Right. And it almost seemed like, with the exception of Wonder Woman, and you can't really say much about Wonder Woman in BVS because she has such a small part, so we don't really get to know her character other than, yeah, guys, it's Wonder Woman.
It's Wonder Woman. You don't know who that is.
You can't really get that wrong. But they don't understand who Batman is, and they don't understand who Lex Luthor is. And you are free when you create an adaptation to create your own vision. But if you are going to use known characters like Lex Luthor and Batman and Superman, you've got to understand that your audience, they have expectations. And if you're going to defy them, you have to defy them in the correct way.
You can't just let Batman pick up a gun and start going absolute doom eternal on this alien invasion without explaining to us, why the hell is Batman using guns?
There's actually the funniest part of that movie was when Batman has a vision, and maybe in Justice League, I don't remember, but he has a vision of the future, and it's just Batman pulling out all of these assault rifles out of the back of the vehicle, and I'm like, what?
What is going? Like, I had to ask my friends. Give me the ABCD on how you freaking got there. Maybe I'll get it. But if you're taking an established character that everybody knows, and they're like, oh, by the way, this one defining character trait, the one rule that he governs his entire existence by, we're just going to throw that into fucking trash, put him in some bat ears. Mm-hmm. That's not the same character. How did we get here?
And actually, I wanted to point out, to go back to my point is that you can do those kind of things and still have a good movie, but it's not as faithful as an adaptation. One of my biggest gripes with Batman v Superman is our Batman and Lex Luthor. I don't really know a whole lot about Superman, just because Superman's never really been my cup of tea. He's kind of a Boy Scout. You know, people like him. I understand that. He's just not for me. But the fact that when Bruce tries to infiltrate Lex's house, he gets caught. Not
three times,
but 3 times. The first time it's by Wonder Woman, so I can kind of let that slide. It's like, oh, okay, she's Wonder Woman. You know, she got superpowers and stuff. That's whatever. Yeah. But the world's greatest detective has been caught infiltrating this man's house 3 times. Are you kidding me?
Really? The master of stealth.
The man who has a file in his computer on how to kill every member of the Justice League, should it ever happen, is getting caught breaking into Lex Luthor's server room. No, that's not Batman. That's Ben Affleck.
Right.
That's Ben Affleck, the person.
It's unbelievable. But
and they don't even understand Lex Luthor either. It's almost, to me, this is how I view Lex Luthor in BVS, is that they told it's not Michael Cera. It's not it's Michael Cera and this guy, and I always get them confused. It's the guy from The Social Network.
All I'm thinking of is the Game Grumps joke where it's like Aaron's like, Mark Zuckerberg, the Social Network, Michael Cera, and he's like muttering like about, oh God, what is this guy's actor's name?
The guy who invented Facebook.
The guy who invented Facebook.
But no, he remembers the actor's name, but not Mark Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg.
But anyway, so whatever his name is, somebody leave it in the comments for me. I will probably remember it before I read the comments, but somebody please tell me what this man's name is. But they told him, they're like, hey, you're playing Edward Nygma. And he's like, cool. So he goes and he watches Batman and Robin. He's kind of trying to adapt, not Batman and Robin, Batman Forever. And he's trying to adapt Jim Carrey.
Jesse Eisenberg.
But he's trying to adapt Jim Carrey's The Riddler and even some of like the quirky stuff that the Riddler does. And then at the last minute they go, oh,
by the way, you're Lex Luthor.
So they dub it. They're like, he's like, oh, hi guys, I am Lex Luthor. And they it almost like they changed it at the last minute because it seems like he's playing Edward Nygma, but then they keep telling me it's Lex Luthor. And
I'm like, this isn't
not how that
right.
Works. But yeah, if you're using characters that are already established and you want to have a good adaptation, you have to understand who those characters are. You can't say that this is Lex Luthor and then just tell Jesse Eisenberg to be himself.
Right. It goes back to what I said. A faithful recreation of the themes and the messages.
And the characters.
And if
you're going to use the characters.
If you're going to use the characters, you have to faithfully recreate them. Otherwise, just use original characters. If this wants to be like a multiversal thing, like, oh, this is just like, this is Earth 616, this is Earth 692, like whatever, that's okay, cool. But you gotta give us some kind of clue of how did we get to this point. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're just using the likeness of the character without actually caring about who the character is or what makes them who they are.
And to kind of bookend this episode, because no adaptation podcast of mine is going to be complete without mentioning this, because it violates literally everything that I've said that you need to be a good adaptation. And we could not justify ourselves as good podcasters if we don't talk about the Eragon film adaptations.
Oh my God.
That sounded like a good noise. Because people can't see your face.
Oh, they can't. I tried to make like the psycho like scream thing. But no, it's horrible. And it breaks my heart because Eragon and the Inheritance Cycle is actually one of my favorite book series of all time.
Inheritance is my favorite book of all time. It
is fantastic. Now, say what you will about Christopher Paolini. I genuinely enjoy his writing. It is an inspiration to me. But oh my God, the movie.
So let's just start from the top of the 3 points. Do you think Eragon the film understood the story that the books were trying to tell?
Not even a little bit. It, like you said, it read the back of the book and went, I could do something like that. Yeah, let's go.
And one of the things I think it did is it changed a lot of the characters, or it omitted characters that it almost was like, did you not have a sequel in mind for this? Because the way they changed some of the characters was, it's like, you're going to have to really change the sequel then, because those characters are integral for the next 2 books.
And you just either completely omitted them or completely changed who they are as people.
Like the 2 I can think of the most would be Roran, who gets no screen time.
0.
And it doesn't introduce Katrina?
The little psychic girl?
No, his Roran's wife.
Roran, oh yeah, that's right, because that, again, the biggest part of the sequel was them going and deciding to rebel and leave and sail down to the coast to join the Varden.
They don't decide to rebel. Roran leaves Carvajal to look for her because she is captured by the Razak.
Oh, yeah.
And if you omit her, you've omitted a lot of his character from the sequel. So were they not planning on making a sequel? I mean, that one didn't irk me as much. That one irked me more of as now they can't continue the story because they didn't understand Roran's motivation as a character after the first book. He's not super important in the first book, but he is quintessential to the next 3.
The character of, was it Durs, the shade, was his name Durzak?
Durza.
They absolutely massacre his character in the book. He is like this terrifying ring wraithish, like being of like ethereal shadow and horror, and like absolutely every time he walks in the room, you're like, oh, somebody's about to fucking die. But in the movie, he looks like
he's a pale weirdo.
He looks like a red tinged worm tongue. Like he absolutely this looks like some crony that likes to kiss the boss's ring, and so he got a modicum of power. He's not intimidating. He's not scary. There's nothing about this man. Like when Darth Vader walks onto the scene in anything that he's in, you're like, oh yeah, everybody hold your breath, somebody's about to die. When Durza walks in, you're like, ah, shit, this ass. Like, he strikes me in the movie like all of his subordinates and coworkers make fun of him behind his back, and he can't do nothing to stop it because.
Well, and you know something else again about continuation. Thinking about the series is they actually killed the Razak in the movie, which is. Then that eliminates so much in the next book. And I would assume, based on how the movie ends, that they were planning on making more.
Right.
But I don't understand how. You're going to kill the Razak. You're not going to have Katrina in the movie. So you're eliminating an entire plot line and so much because you didn't adapt it well. And all you had to do was add in a character and not have Eragon kill the Razak with trees, which was really anticlimactic.
So stupid. Like, what? Like, absolutely. Again, completely takes the threat away from the Razak. Like, the Razak were like the ring wraiths. They show up and you're like, oh God, like, oh, we can do nothing to fight against these guys. They were so far beyond us. But, like, his journey to defeat the Razak, to avenge the death of Brahm, was a major part of his character arc. And they just threw it in the trash in like 10 minutes. Not even anything impressive to look at.
Well, and something else I like how you brought up the ring wraiths and the film, because again I haven't read the Fellowship of the Ring, but the first time you see the ring wraiths, they're standing over top of the hobbits. They're hiding underneath the like that branch. They're like hiding in a little cave. You get by the atmosphere, by the reactions of the characters, that these are horrifying creatures, and they keep going with that idea every time you see them. So that's something that they did to enhance those characters. They gave it, the music and the sound and the images. Those are things you can't get from reading a book.
Right.
And that enhanced it. They just made the Razak guys in trash bags.
Right.
And they weren't scary. They were throwaway enemies.
Yeah.
Like, any kind of Marvel big battle
at the bad guys
at the end of the movie when they're killing, aliens by the thousands. And that takes away from a lot of the story, so they don't understand the story. So let's see.
Other ways that it completely failed. Eragon, the guy who plays Eragon, completely boring. Flat, two-dimensional, had no motivation. I did not care to see if this guy won or not.
I actually think that the guy they had playing him was fine. He was a kid. He was that naive kid who Eragon is in the first book. And he does a lot of things, and a lot of the mistakes that Eragon makes is because he's a kid. He's a little cocky, kind of like, oh, I can do this. He thinks, bigger than his britches. And I do think that the film did get those parts right.
Fair enough.
The kid always looks kind of a little weird when he smiles, and that kind of unnerved me, but that's just a personal preference. I actually, and this was something you and I talked about earlier, I had an issue with the guy who played Brahm, personally. In the book, to me, at least how it was described, Brahm was this really old, really grizzled guy. And when you find out who Brahm is, he's like beyond the age of a person because of who he is.
120 or something like that.
I don't want to knock, I think it's Jeremy Irons that plays him. He's a great actor. Scar's a fantastic character, but I don't think he got that across. He was like Eragon's grizzled uncle, not somebody's like Eragon's the wise old mentor that lived.
He was not a Dumbledore. He was not a Obi-Wan.
He was a Severus Snape, which is not what that should have been.
No.
And it's not just the fact that he wasn't old. It was the fact that he didn't come across with that aged experience that Brahm has the feel of this guy who has seen so much, and that's why he's so wise, because he has lived so long to have seen all of these things, and that's kind of the presence that he gives off. This one's just kind of like, I'm an angry guy.
I'm angry. Like you interrupted like his afternoon, snack in order to go on this quest.
You interrupted his afternoon yelling at kids on his lawn, and now he's mad. There were a couple I liked. One of the things I did think that adaptation did well is having Ajahad and Nasuada from the Varden, he's the leader, that it really drove home that they are characters of color. I thought that was really nice because it mentions it in the book, but it doesn't make it a big thing. But when it's on the big screen, it's like, oh, okay.
No, clearly.
I thought that was fine. The casting is actually, other than Brahm, is the least offensive thing about the film.
I like how you were the least offensive. It wasn't great.
It was
the least offensive. I hated how they handled Saphira. Like, absolutely hated how they handled Saphira.
They threw Saphira into the sky, and that's how she grew up. If that's not the most, what is she, a Pokemon?
Right. Like
in the book, they could have done this as a montage of her growing up because that's
getting
how
older and
in the books, if you've never read the books, that's how she learns the language. Is she has that psychic connection with Eragon, and he teaches her. It's like she'll show him an image, and he'll tell her that is a tree. And in the book, it's just kind of like he's got little cute. Baby Saphira was really cute. I ain't even gonna lie, but he throws her up into the sky, and she comes back fully grown.
She digivolves
and says, "I am Saphira," and that is also an issue with me because him naming her Saphira is a big deal because she's named. I believe she's named after somebody else's dragon, or it's kind of like how him coming up with her name is a big part of her character. Especially in book 4, where Eragon and Saphira are trying to figure out who their true names and who they are. And that's part of that. She doesn't just descend from the sky, say, "Hi, I'm a lowland executor now. I've evolved."
I'm a lowland executor. Oh no.
It's doing stuff like that. Yeah, it saves a lot of time, but it takes away part of what makes her character and part of what develops her a little later on.
Eragon the movie is a perfect example of a bunch of Hollywood producers going, what's popular right now? That, sure.
Lord of the Rings?
Throw some money.
I believe Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King had just, the trilogy had just finished, so I think they were looking to make the next great
movie
fantasy.
genre was still doing really strong thanks to Peter Jackson. The Harry Potter movies were still doing very strong. And this new young artist, Christopher Paolini, had just come out with a new young adult fantasy novel that was doing very well. And they're like, just throw some fucking money at it. Yeah, make a movie. It doesn't even matter if it's good or not. They'll buy tickets. And they didn't because the news travels very fast that, oh, hey, don't go see this movie. It's garbage.
And it's frustrating because, again, if you've watched this before, the potential that it had to be, I was so excited going into this. The casting didn't look too bad from the previews. I actually kind of like Saphira's film design. I think it's really nice.
I don't think it's bad.
And I think it kind of pays homage to the original book cover. I like that. I thought that was really neat. But then I sat down and watched it, and I wanted to ask for my money back I was in middle school at the time, or high school at the time. But that is a way for how to adapt something badly. And it's because you do not know the story. You don't understand the characters. And if you don't know those two things, do not bother adapting anything.
We're looking at the time, and there's a reason why we said we were going to make this a 2-parter.
We lied. We lied. This is probably going to end up being 3 parts because we still have a lot that we want to talk about with video game adaptation films because that's a fun topic.
Oh, man.
So tune in the next couple of weeks to Adaptations Part 2. I am Ravah.
I am Arthur.
And the court is adjourned.